Claire stared at the winding road ahead, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. The soft glow of her phone illuminated the dark interior of her car, flashing with threatening messages from her ex. Each beep sent a shiver down her spine, reminding her of the torment she was fleeing. Her heart raced as she thought of the vibrant life she had been forced to abandon, now just a distant memory. The trees lining the road were tall and menacing, their branches stretching towards her like skeletal fingers in the fading light. Shadows danced along the pavement, and for a moment she felt as if they were alive, whispering secrets of the night. Taking a deep breath, Claire attempted to focus on the promise of safety ahead, a fresh start away from the chaos that had consumed her life for too long. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the inky darkness crept in quickly, swathing her in a blanket of unease. Claire glanced in her rearview mirror, half expecting to see the headlights of her past on her tail. "Just keep driving," she murmured to herself, channeling all her strength into the road before her. But then, with a sudden jolt, the car began to sputter and groan, its engine wheezing pathetically before it finally gave up. Claire's heart sank as she pulled to the side of the road, the silence around her amplifying her panic. Alone in the mouth of the forest and cut off from the world, she felt the weight of a million thoughts crashing down on her. Was this her last chance at freedom? She leaned her head against the steering wheel, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. As she exhaled slowly, a fine mist of fog began to rise from the ground outside, swirling like the tendrils of her fears. Claire sat in her car, the stillness of the night pressing against her like a heavy weight. She glanced around, the eerie quiet broken only by the rustling leaves and the distant call of an owl. The roads were empty, the isolation suffocating. With trembling fingers, she tried to restart the car, praying for a miracle, but the engine merely coughed, sputtering like an old man struggling to breathe. A wave of dread washed over her as she realized the reality of her situation, stranded in the middle of nowhere, with no one to help her. A moment of panic erupted as she fished her phone from her pocket. No signal. Just her in the dark, enveloped by towering trees that seemed to close in around her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. In a desperate attempt to regain control, she swung open the door and stepped out into the chilly night air. The silence was deafening. She looked down the empty road, hoping to see headlights approaching. Nothing. Just darkness stretching endlessly before her. Feeling an unsettling shiver run down her spine, Claire decided to search for help instead of waiting idly in her immobilized car. She took a deep breath, steeling herself against the fear creeping into her mind. Chilled to the bone, she moved cautiously towards the path, each step echoing in the stillness, as shadows danced playfully behind her. As Claire ventured down the darkened path, she squinted into the abyss ahead, the uncertainty gnawing at her. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance, outlined against the remaining light of the twilight sky. Her heart raced. Instincts told her to be cautious, yet the desperation for help pushed her forward. The figure stepped into the faint light, and Claire's tension eased slightly when she saw it was a man. He looked ordinary enough, with tousled hair and a friendly smile. "Hey there! You all right?" he called out, his voice warm against the chill of the night. My car broke down. I'm trying to find help," Claire replied, scanning his features for any signs of danger. "I can give you a ride to the nearest inn. It's just a few miles from here," he offered, gesturing towards a faint glow in the distance. The sensation of safety washed over her, albeit reluctantly. Could she trust him? Claire hesitated, glancing back at her car, engulfed in darkness. Her instincts screamed at her to be wary, but the thought of being alone in the woods was far more terrifying. Swallowing her apprehension, she nodded. "Okay, let's go." The drive to the inn was brief, but with every passing moment, Claire felt the shadows of doubt seep into her mind. The man, introducing himself as Tom, chatted casually, But Claire was only half listening, her thoughts racing. She studied him from the corner of her eye, noting his casual demeanor and the way he handled the steering wheel with practiced ease. As they arrived, Claire's unease transformed into a blend of curiosity and wariness. The inn loomed before her, an old, sprawling structure that seemed to be part of the forest itself. Its weathered wood and flickering lights gave it an almost nostalgic charm, but the overgrown vines wrapping around the porch whispered stories of abandonment. "Welcome to the Maple Grove Inn," Tom said, gesturing grandly. Claire stepped out, taking in the creaking floorboards beneath her feet as she entered. The air inside smelled of wood polish and something sweetly familiar, yet ominous. The lobby was dimly lit, with a quaint fireplace crackling softly in the corner. A few guests sat at scattered tables, their hushed conversations barely audible. They all turned to look at her, their gazes lingering a little too long. Claire felt a chill run down her spine as an unsettling sensation settled in the pit of her stomach, the feeling of being observed. Tom led her to the front desk, where an elderly woman greeted them with a thin smile. "We have a room available. You must be tired after your journey." Claire took the key and thanked the woman, her unease swelling with each step she took down the dimly lit hallway. The inn's rustic charm was overshadowed by a strange energy hanging in the air, thick and palpable. As she entered her room, she felt a mixture of relief and trepidation wash over her. The space was adorned with vintage decor, but it felt as though the past lingered too closely, watching. After a quick shower, Claire threw herself onto the bed, mentally exhausted from the day's chaos. She tried to push her worries aside, but sleep eluded her. A rhythmic creaking outside her door broke the silence, pulling her from the cusp of slumber. She strained to listen, heart pounding in her chest. The noise stopped, replaced by faint whispers that seemed to flutter through the cracks in the walls. Unable to resist the pull of curiosity, she slipped out of bed and ventured towards the door. As she opened it slightly, she peered into the darkened hallway. To her surprise, the area was empty, yet the whispers persisted, echoing through the wooden beams. Was she imagining things, or was there truly something lurking just out of sight? Taking a deep breath, she quietly opened her door wider, her heart racing as she stepped into the corridor, compelled to uncover the source of the unsettling sounds that stirred her unease. As Claire stepped into the hallway, the whispers faded, replaced by the soft rustle of the wind outside. She cautiously made her way down, her footsteps muted by the aged carpet. The flickering lights seemed to cast shadows that danced playfully, and she hesitated, feeling drawn deeper into the inn's enigmatic atmosphere. Without a clear destination, Claire wandered past unmarked doors and closed windows, listening for any sound that might reveal the inn's hidden secrets. Then, as she approached a door slightly ajar, an inexplicable urge tugged at her. She pushed it open just a crack, revealing a dimly lit room lined with bookshelves filled with old, dusty volumes. Her curiosity piqued. Claire entered the room, where musty air thick with history enveloped her. On a small desk in the corner lay an inviting journal, its leather cover worn but intact, as if waiting for someone to uncover its contents. Pushing aside her hesitation, she picked it up and opened it. Inside were pages filled with neat handwriting, chronicling the life of a woman named Lila, a young girl who had once stayed at the inn. As Claire read through the entries, her stomach twisted as she learned of Lila's hardships, her friendships with other guests, and hints of a dark fate that awaited her. With each word, Claire felt an unsettling connection to Lila's story, realizing that the unknown sorrow echoing through the inn may have been tied to the same chilling mystery of Lila's disappearance. Claire sat in the dim room, the journal clutched tightly to her chest, her heart racing as she processed the chilling revelations. Lila's words seemed to leap off the pages, wrapping around her like a shroud. The final entries described a growing sense of dread, strange happenings in the inn, and whispers that haunted her in the night. It became increasingly clear that something sinister lay beneath the inn's facade. As she flipped through the pages, Claire came across a hastily written note tucked between the leaves, the ink smudged as if Lila had penned it in a hurry. "If you ever read this, trust no one. They are not who they seem. The inn wants to keep its secrets," it warned. The implications sent a chill straight to Claire's bones. Heart pounding, she felt an urgent need to confront the other guests about Lila's fate. She slipped out of the room, determined to gather the pieces of the puzzle that were slowly aligning in her mind. As she walked back down the dimly lit corridor, she could almost hear the whispers echoing her thoughts, fueling her anxiety. Rejoining the group in the common area, she spotted a man in the hotel who had been watching her earlier. Summoning her courage, Claire approached him. "We need to talk. It's about Lila. And the others. Something isn't right here." But as she spoke, she noticed the tense expressions on the faces of the guests around her. The atmosphere in the common area shifted, becoming thick with tension as Claire's words hung in the air. The guests exchanged furtive glances, their faces now illuminated not just by the flickering firelight, but by a growing sense of anxiety. The man's expression hardened, his gaze narrowing on Claire as if weighing her words with utmost seriousness. "Lila," he echoed, his voice low and cautious. "What do you know about her?" Claire's heart raced as she took a step closer, her resolve strengthening amidst the palpable fear. "I found her diary," she revealed, holding it up as evidence. "She warned about the inn and everyone here. You're all connected to her. What happened to her?" The stark question rolled off her tongue, drawing the attention of every guest in the room. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the quiet crackle of the fireplace. One guest, a middle-aged woman, shifted uncomfortably. Lila was troubled. She finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some thought she was imagining things. Ghosts, stuff like that." Claire felt a surge of frustration. "It's not a joke. She vanished. You all must know something." Suddenly, the door swung open, revealing Tom standing in the entryway, his demeanor unreadable. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone casual, but Claire sensed an undercurrent of concern. Before anyone could answer, Claire realized that her confrontation had awakened a hidden fear among them. This wasn't just about Lila anymore. It was about the real dangers lurking within the inn's walls. With man standing in the doorway, Claire felt her breath hitch in her throat. The tension in the room surged, and Claire's instincts screamed at her that danger loomed just out of sight. The guests looked at one another, uncertainty thickening the air like fog. "We need to get out of here," Claire urged, desperation creeping into her voice. "If Lila was right, staying here puts us all at risk." The unease among the guests cracked open like fragile glass. Their faces betrayed a mixture of fear and denial, but Claire could see that the shadows of doubt had taken root in their minds. "Where do you think you're going?" Man's voice was suddenly low, almost menacing. Claire turned to face him, her heart racing as she realized the veneer of friendliness he'd worn was slipping. Before she could react, he stepped toward her, blocking her path. "You don't understand what you're dealing with here," he warned. The room seemed to close in around her, the other guests shrinking back in silent horror. In a moment of instinct, Claire grabbed a nearby chair and swung it at Man. It connected, and he stumbled back, temporarily stunned. Seizing the opportunity, Claire dashed toward the exit, yelling for the others to follow. "Run!" she screamed, her voice echoing against the walls. The guests hesitated, but the urgent need for escape surged in their veins. The tension shattered into chaos as Claire led the charge through the inn, the hunt for freedom beginning now. With Tom standing in the doorway, Claire felt her breath hitch in her throat. The tension in the room surged, and Claire's instincts screamed at her that danger loomed just out of sight. The guests looked at one another, uncertainty thickening the air like fog. "We need to get out of here," Claire urged, desperation creeping into her voice. "If Lila was right, staying here puts us all at risk." The unease among the guests cracked open like fragile glass. Their faces betrayed a mixture of fear and denial, but Claire could see that the shadows of doubt had taken root in their minds. "Where do you think you're going?" Tom's voice was suddenly low, almost menacing. Claire turned to face him, her heart racing as she realized the veneer of friendliness he'd worn was slipping. Before she could react, he stepped toward her, blocking her path. "You don't understand what you're dealing with here," he warned. The room seemed to close in around her, the other guests shrinking back in silent horror. In a moment of instinct, Claire grabbed a nearby chair and swung it at Tom. It connected, and he stumbled back, temporarily stunned. Seizing the opportunity, Claire dashed toward the exit, yelling for the others to follow. "Run!" she screamed, her voice echoing against the walls. The guests hesitated, but the urgent need for escape surged in their veins. The tension shattered into chaos as Claire led the charge through the inn, the hunt for freedom beginning now. Claire raced through the dimly lit hallways, her heart pounding as the adrenaline coursed through her veins. Behind her, she could hear the frantic footsteps of the other guests following her lead. The commotion stirred a palpable fear, pushing them to abandon caution in favor of survival. "Out the back!" Claire shouted as they burst through a door leading to the kitchen, the scent of old wood and forgotten meals filling their lungs. She glanced behind and caught a glimpse of Tom, anger etched on his face, as he rounded the corner. They darted through the kitchen and out a back door that led to a narrow path bordered by trees. Claire's breaths came in quick gasps as she urged the group onward, feeling an invisible threat closing in. The faint glow of the parking area was in sight, but a creeping sense of dread told her they would need more than luck to escape. Just as they reached the parking lot, Claire turned to see Tom emerging from the shadows, eyes wild with determination. "You can't leave," he shouted, his voice echoing like a ghost in the night. Ignoring the fear choking her, Claire frantically rummaged through her purse for her phone. It took only a moment to find it, and as she dialed for help, she shot a desperate glance back at the inn. And then, just as suddenly as it all began, the haunting whispers returned, swirling around her like a tempest. Claire had a fleeting thought of Lila. Perhaps the spirits of the lost lingered beyond the darkness. As a police siren pierced the night, Claire felt the weight of her own survival and the unresolved questions about what happened that night at the inn. With the dawn creeping on the horizon, Claire knew she had escaped, but the mystery would forever haunt her heart.